The glass slipped from my hand and shattered against the kitchen tile. Sharp, loud, final. I didn't even flinch as blood pooled around my bare foot, warm against the cold floor. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing, shallow and uneven. The lights flickered once, then steadied, like nothing had happened. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 52 years old, and my husband left me, took our children with him, and told me to be gone from my own house when he came back from marrying another woman overseas. That message buzzed on my phone while I was still standing there, bleeding, invisible. But what they didn't know was, I had been preparing for this moment for years. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. Sitting alone in your car, on the couch after a long day, or quietly in bed, pretending everything's fine, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Not by strangers, not by enemies, but by the people who were supposed to protect you, to choose you, stand beside you. Because this isn't just my story. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, you're going to understand every word of what comes next. I learned early that love could sound like a clink of silverware and still leave you hungry. When I was 9, my mother set dinner on the table like she was arranging proof that we were normal. Meatloaf under a thin glaze, green beans slick with butter, mashed potatoes with a crater of gravy. The television murmured baseball, and my father's laugh floated from the couch. The kitchen smelled like onions and dish soap on my mother's hands. She always served my brother first. David needs the bigger piece, she'd say, slicing with the good knife. He's growing. I'd sit with my fork hovering, pretending I didn't care. The chair vinyl stuck to my legs in the summer heat, and the ceiling fan clicked like it was keeping score. My brother grinned over his plate, cheeks already full. I swallowed the tight feeling in my throat and took the smaller slice. I didn't know it then, but I was practicing for a life where I'd always take the smaller slice and call it enough. By high school, I was the girl teachers liked because I didn't cause trouble. I did the work. I kept my head down. The day I won a statewide essay contest, my English teacher called my parents from the office, voice shaking with pride. My father showed up in work boots, smelling like motor oil and cigarette smoke. My mother followed with her purse clutched tight, mascara already smudged from the heat. The principal handed me a certificate and a photo op. A camera flash popped, bright and quick. "Get one with David," my father said, like it was obvious. David wasn't even here, my teacher whispered. My mother waved her hand. "Just do it. He'll want it for his scrapbook." So I stood there holding my award while my brother stepped into the frame. Taller, louder, smiling as if he'd earned it. When we got home, my father taped the picture to the fridge and wrote David's name under it. Not mine. I didn't correct him. I smiled. I washed the dishes. I didn't know it then, but that quiet erasure would come back in a much louder form. College was never really a question. Not for me. For David, yes. He got the campus tours, the late-night talks at the kitchen table, the proud stories told to neighbors. For me, it was assumed I'd figure something out because I always did. I worked evenings at a grocery store under flickering fluorescent lights, scanning cans and listening to the beep that measured my life in small transactions. The air smelled like bruised bananas and floor cleaner. Every paycheck. I mailed part of it home. My mother would call and say, "You're a good girl, Evelyn." The way people compliment a reliable appliance. David needed new tires. He can't drive on bald ones. Once, near Christmas, I asked if I could keep a little extra for textbooks. The line went quiet. And then my father's voice cut in. Rough. Don't get selfish. Family is family. That night, I stared at the numbers on my bank receipt until they blurred. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was breath into a pillow so no one would hear. I didn't know it then. But family is family was going to become the excuse people used while taking everything from me. I met Richard at 23. At a charity luncheon I only attended because my supervisor begged me to fill an empty seat. The room was white tablecloths and iced tea glasses sweating onto linen. A string quartet played something soft. Richard walked in late, confident, tan, hair perfect in that effortless way that never happens by accident. When he smiled at me, it was like he was choosing me out of a crowd. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, leaning close enough that I could smell mint and cologne. "I'd rather be at work," I admitted. He laughed. "That's honest. I like honest." Richard was the kind of man who made plans out loud, big ones. He talked about starting his own construction company, buying property when everyone else was scared, never answering to a boss. He spoke like the world was a door that would open if he knocked hard enough. I was drawn to that certainty like a moth to a porch light. The first time he brought me to meet his friends, they called him Rick the Rocket. They teased him, but their eyes were admiring. When they asked what I did, I said, "Accounts payable," and their attention slid right past me. Richard squeezed my knee under the table, as if to say he saw me. I held on to that squeeze for years. We married fast. Not because I was brave, but because I was tired of being the invisible daughter in someone else's kitchen. Richard offered a different kind of life, a place where I could be chosen, where I could be needed. On our wedding night, the motel room smelled like cheap champagne and floral air freshener. The bedspread was itchy. Richard traced a finger along my wrist and said, "We're going to build something real. Ev, you and me." I believed him so hard it felt like faith. The first years were lean. We rented a duplex with a leaky faucet that clicked all night like a metronome. Richard worked jobs for other contractors, coming home with dust in his hair and a sunburned neck. I worked in an office during the day and kept books for him at night, balancing receipts on the kitchen table while spaghetti boiled over because I forgot to stir. The air filled with the metallic smell of scorched sauce, and Richard kissed my forehead anyway. "This is temporary," he'd say, dropping his boots by the door. "One day, it'll be ours." When Lucas was born, I held his tiny body against my chest and felt something in me open like a window after a long winter. He smelled like milk and new skin. Richard stood over us with a grin, already talking about college funds. 2 years later, Mia arrived in a storm. Rain hammering the hospital window. She was loud from the first second, furious at the world. And I loved her instantly. For a while, we looked like the picture people frame. Neighborhood barbecues, family photos with matching sweaters. Richard's company trucks lined up outside job sites. But pictures don't show the late nights when Richard disappeared into meetings that always ended at bars. Pictures don't show me at the dining table, the only one awake, signing checks and filing taxes while everyone slept. Some nights I'd hear the garage door groan at midnight, then the soft buzz of his phone. He'd whisper, "Work stuff," and roll away from me. I pretended sleep, quietly. I didn't know it then, but I was building more than a business. I was building a cage, and I was the only one who held the key. The first time I saw Natalie's name, it wasn't on lipstick or lingerie. It was on a receipt. A thin strip of paper was crumpled in Richard's truck console, stuck to a napkin that smelled like old fries. I was digging for the insurance card. My fingers caught the receipt and unfolded it. Boutique, $298, size extra small. And at the bottom, a cashier's scribble Natalie B. The numbers stopped being numbers. They turned into a sentence I didn't want to read. Not proof yet, just a whisper. I didn't know it then. But that whisper would teach me to listen to everything Richard never said out loud. That night he came home late, boots heavy on hardwood, humming like a man who'd had a great day. He kissed my cheek, not my mouth. The scent on him wasn't sawdust. It was vanilla and something bright, like citrus shampoo. He went straight to the shower, and the bathroom filled with steam that smelled like cover-up. "You okay?" I asked through the door. "Yeah," he said. "Too quick. Just tired." I stood in the hallway with my palms on the wallpaper. The furnace clicked. The fridge hummed. In the living room, Mia laughed at a cartoon. I swallowed the question that would change everything, because I still believed in the picture on the wall. In the morning, I packed lunches while Lucas complained about a math test and Mia argued about socks. Richard sat at the island, thumb flicking over his phone. smiling at something that wasn't us. "Who's got you grinning like that?" I tried to make it light. He didn't look up. "Work." Mia sighed like I was embarrassing her. "Mom." "Stop. You're always interrogating." Interrogating. The word landed in my chest. Small but sharp. I didn't know it then. But my kids were already learning to protect him from me. Like I was the danger. Richard's stories got smoother over the years. His meetings got longer. And whenever I asked about money, his patience snapped. "Why do you care about this stuff?" he'd say, flicking a contract like it was dirty. "It'll work out." It always did, because I made it. The house was his favorite brag. 3-car garage. Pool we used twice a year. He called it our kingdom. But the down payment came from my parents' inheritance, sitting in an account he never bothered to learn the password to. When the title paperwork came, my attorney insisted my name be first. Richard signed without reading. He always signed without reading. "You're so paranoid," he teased. "Who are you?" "The FBI." "No," I said, forcing a laugh. "Just the one making sure we don't fall." I didn't know it then, but that careless signature would become the hinge my whole future swung on. By the time Lucas was in his 20s, he drifted from idea to idea like a leaf on water. He called it entrepreneurship. The newest plan was crypto, full of phrases like passive income. Richard adored it. Mia filmed Lucas pitching in our living room, posting it with a caption about family hustle. I sat at the table with the loan papers, reading every line under the kitchen light. "It's a personal guarantee," I said. "If it fails, they come after whoever signs." Richard waved a hand. "You worry too much." Lucas leaned in, impatient. "Mom, you don't get it. This is the future." Mia added, "Dad believes in him. Why can't you? Why can't you?" Like belief was the only currency that mattered. I signed nothing. Richard did. Lucas grinned like he'd won. I didn't know it then. But that signature was going to tighten like a rope. Mia started treating our home like a studio, and me like background noise. She'd pose by the staircase, face tilted toward sunlight, and whisper, "Don't walk through. You'll ruin the shot." So I learned to move like a ghost in the place I paid for. Richard mistook my quiet for surrender. He stopped hiding his phone. He'd step outside to take calls, voice low, then come back smiling to himself. Once, I heard him murmur, "She's fine. She'll adjust." Like I was a thermostat. The night I found the thong in his gym bag, it was red lace tangled with a jump rope. I stood in the laundry room under fluorescent light, holding it like evidence from a crime scene. The washer thumped, indifferent. My mouth went dry. Richard walked in, towel over his shoulder. He froze briefly, then recovered fast. "It's probably Mia's," he said. I laughed once. "Bitter. Mia doesn't wear a size extra small." His eyes hardened. "Don't start. Don't start." The command hit my oldest wound, the one that learned silence to survive. I folded the lace into my palm until it disappeared and I nodded. I didn't know it then, but that nod was the moment I stopped being his wife and became his auditor. I watched, not like a jealous woman, like a woman doing an investigation. Receipts, hotel charges, a second phone line, cash withdrawals timed with golf weekends. The pattern was so clean it felt insulting. While he thought he was living a secret life, I was mapping it. I met Helen Wu after a friend slid her number across a table at a charity event. "Just in case," she whispered. Helen's office smelled like coffee and copier toner. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and asked, "Do you want revenge, or do you want freedom?" My throat tightened. I wanted to say both. Instead, I whispered, "I want to stop disappearing." I didn't know it then, but that was the first honest sentence I'd said in years. For months, I acted normal. Grocery lists, family dinners where Richard talked over me and the kids laughed at his jokes. I smiled and poured iced tea. At night, I gathered documents, deeds, statements, proof of inheritance. I learned what could be revoked, what could be protected, what could be proved. I built a file so thick it felt like a second spine. I didn't know it then, but I was building a door. Then Richard finally said the quiet part out loud. He stood in the kitchen I designed and said, casual as a weather report, "I'm done. I'm not happy. Natalie makes me feel alive." Lucas didn't even look at me. Dad deserves a second chance. Mia Seahill, annoyed, "Mom, don't be dramatic." And in that moment, the 9-year-old girl at the meatloaf table disappeared completely. Something colder stepped forward. Something that didn't ask to be chosen anymore. Richard booked Tuscany, a villa, a ceremony he called a wedding. He took the kids like trophies, and he left me a text like a slap, "Be gone when we return." I hate old things. I stood in the quiet house, listening to the pool filter whisper outside, and I finally understood. I wasn't losing them. They had already decided to lose me. The first week after Richard left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt staged, like a model home where nobody lived and every surface stayed clean because no one touched it. His side of the closet was bare except for a single wire hanger that swung when the AC kicked on. I kept catching myself listening for his key in the lock, not because I wanted him back, but because my body didn't know how to stop waiting. I didn't know it then, but waiting was about to turn into hunger. Lucas treated Richard's departure like a temporary renovation. He showed up on Saturday with a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. Wearing sunglasses indoors like he was filming my life, he walked straight to the pantry, opened it, frowned, and said, "You still buying the cheap cereal?" I stared at him. "It's cereal." He shrugged. "Dad always got the good stuff." "Dad, not us, not me, Dad." Then he leaned against the counter. Casual. "So, how much are you going to give me this month? I need runway. The market's about to bounce." "I'm not giving you anything," I said. His smile froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're 28. Figure it out." Lucas laughed like I'd made a joke. "Mom, stop. You're emotional. Dad leaving has you spiraling." Spiraling. Like my boundaries were a symptom. I watched my hand grip the counter until my knuckles went pale, and I realized my son had learned the same language Richard used to shrink me. I swallowed it, but it burned on the way down. 2 days later, Mia sent a group text titled Tuscany Planning. I wasn't in it. I found out because Mark Reynolds called me from the office and asked if I'd approved a company card charge for a villa deposit. His voice was careful, like he was stepping around broken glass. "I didn't," I said. There was a pause. "It's under Richard's usual account." Richard's usual account. My business, my card, my name. When I opened the statement, the charge sat there like a bruise. $10,000 to a travel agent, plus upgrades, plus something labeled romantic extras. My stomach went cold. I drove to the office and confronted Richard in the parking lot as if this was still a marriage and not a hostile takeover. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look guilty. "It's for the wedding," he said. Like that explained everything. "You're using my company money." I said. He smiled. Small and mean. "It's our money. Don't be dramatic. Our." The word he only used when he was taking. I pulled the card from his hand. He stepped closer, paused. "Give it back." "No." His eyes narrowed. "You're not in charge of me anymore. Evelyn." The air smelled like hot asphalt. I felt my pulse in my throat. "I've been in charge of everything," I said quietly. "You just never noticed." He leaned in, voice low. "Be gone when we return. Don't make this messy." I watched him walk away like he owned the street, and I tasted metal in my mouth. Like my body was warning me, this was war. I didn't cry, but something cracked anyway. The next disaster arrived by mail. Envelope. Lucas's handwriting. Inside was a printed notice from a lender and a sticky note. "Need you to cover this. Dad said you would." My chest tightened so fast it felt like a hand closing around my lungs. The loan was 3 months behind, and the amount wasn't pocket change. It was a whole life. I called Lucas. He answered on the third ring. Chewing. "Yeah, why am I getting your loan default notice?" He sounded bored. "Because you're the backup. It's fine. Dad's just traveling. You can pay it and we'll settle up later. We'll settle up later, I repeated, and my voice didn't sound like mine. Mom, don't start with the lecture. Crypto is volatile. You signed a personal guarantee. So did Dad. And you're basically Dad's bank. Come on. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the carpet. You don't miss me, I said before I could stop myself. You miss what I pay for. Silence. Then a sigh. Irritated. Why are you making this about feelings? Because my feelings had been the first thing everyone learned to dismiss. I hung up with my hands shaking, and the shaking didn't stop for an hour. On Thursday, I watched a neighbor's barbecue through the slats of my blinds. Laughter spilling over the fence. The smell of grilled meat drifting into my yard like a reminder that life kept moving without me. Mia posted a story with Richard's arm around her, both of them smiling in that perfect way. Under it, she wrote, "New chapter." I typed, "Call me." I erased it. I typed, "Are you okay?" I erased that too. Then I watched her story loop until it disappeared, and I realized my daughter had turned my absence into content. I swallowed it, but it carved deeper than I expected. Friday night, the doorbell rang at 9:30. Sharp and impatient, I opened the door to Natalie, wrapped in a camel coat that probably cost more than my first car. Her smile was bright, but her eyes kept drifting past me into my foyer like she was checking the square footage. "Hi," she said. "Richard told me you might be difficult. Did he send you here?" I asked. She shrugged. "He said it's better if we clear the air." Woman to woman. Natalie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm not trying to steal anything that's yours. Richard says the marriage was over years ago." "That's funny," I said, "because he still hides things like a married man." Her smile twitched. "He says you don't take care of yourself, that you let things go." There it was, my core wound, wrapped in fake sympathy. I stared at her face, so young it hadn't learned consequences yet, and something inside me went still. "You should leave," I said. She lifted her chin. "Soon you won't be able to tell me what to do in this house." In this house, like she'd already moved in. I closed the door gently, then slid the deadbolt with a click that sounded like a decision. I didn't know it then, but that click would echo later. The next morning, Richard showed up with a rented moving truck and Lucas riding shotgun. The engine idled in my driveway like a threat. Lucas jumped down first. "All entitlement. We're here for Dad's stuff," he said. Richard didn't greet me. He just scanned the house. "We'll be quick. You didn't schedule this," I replied. "I'm not asking permission to take what's mine," he said. "Mine." The word again. Mia arrived 10 minutes later, filming the second she stepped out. She pointed the camera at me, then at the truck, whispering, "This is insane." They moved through my home like they were stripping a set. Richard yanked photos off the wall. Not the ones of us, but the ones where he looked important. Lucas carried out electronics. Mia wandered, commenting on decor like she was touring a rental. When Richard reached for my mother's china cabinet, my voice cut through the room. "Don't." He paused. "It's just dishes." "It's not," I said. He smiled. "Cold. You're sentimental about junk. That's your problem." Lucas snorted. "Mom, let it go. Let it go." I watched them take pieces of my history and call it junk. I swallowed it, but it left a bruise. After they left, the living room looked thinner, like the air had been scooped out. I sat where the rug had been and noticed a pale rectangle of unfaded wood. That's what grief looked like, an outline of what used to be there. My phone buzzed that afternoon. A text from Mia, not a call. "We're in Italy next week. Don't do anything crazy." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned, as if my pain was a potential inconvenience. I didn't know it then, but that label would follow me. Tuesday. The HOA president, Mrs. Daly, cornered me at the mailbox with a brittle smile. "I heard Richard's having a destination wedding," she said, like she was discussing lawn care. "How exciting for him." "I'm sure," I replied. She glanced at my ring finger, then at the empty driveway. Well, if you're planning to move, remember the bylaws. No for sale signs without approval. Move, like my leaving was already assumed. My stomach dropped, the way it always used to. That evening, Lucas called. Voice too casual. Dad needs the garage code. And the gate clicker? Natalie's bringing suitcases when they get back. I held the phone tighter. Tell your father he can talk to my lawyer. I said, Lucas Seahill, you're really doing this. I hung up. My hands shook. Just a little, but it mattered. On Monday, Mark Reynolds asked me to come to the office. He shut his door and slid a folder across his desk. Richard's been pulling cash advances, he said. On the business line, telling vendors you approved it. I opened the folder. Dates, amounts, notes. It wasn't passion. It was plunder. I can freeze access, Mark offered. Do it, I said. Mark hesitated. Are you okay? The question hit like a slap because nobody asked me that. Not Richard. Not the kids. Not even me. I will be, I said, and it sounded like a promise. That night, I sat in my car outside Helen Wu's office. Watching the lobby lights shut off one by one, rain tapped the windshield, soft and relentless. I didn't go in right away. I sat with my hands on the wheel, feeling 30 years of swallowing rise like bile. Then I pushed the door open and walked inside. Helen didn't offer pity. She offered facts. We protect what's yours, she said, and we document everything. I nodded, because documentation was the language I trusted. I didn't know it then, but there was one document I'd forgotten, and it could destroy me if Richard found it first. I reached the courthouse before sunrise, the sky a dull slate that made the city feel bruised. The air smelled like wet concrete and burnt coffee from a cart near the steps. My heels clicked too loud. Every echo sounded like a warning. Inside, the security gate beeped as my keys hit the tray. Helen Wu waited outside courtroom 4B, calm as a locked door. Charcoal suit, hair pinned back, a stack of documents in her arms like armor. Breathe, she said. Let them hang themselves. Richard arrived with the confidence of a man who thought he still owned the room. Navy suit, tie crooked, jaw set. Lucas followed with a coffee, eyes tired and entitled. Mia trailed behind, phone hidden in her sleeve. Pretending she wasn't itching to record, Natalie glided beside Richard in a pale dress that screamed bridal without saying the word. She smiled at me like I was outdated decor. Richard leaned toward Lucas, voice sharp. Don't look at her. She'll make a scene. I heard it anyway. My stomach tightened. My face stayed still. The bailiff opened the doors and cold air rolled out, smelling of disinfectant and old paper. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, a seal on the wall, gallery seats that creaked with every shift. Judge Alvarez entered, robe swaying, expression carved from stone. Carter versus Carter. She said, counsel. Richard's attorney, David Parker, stood first, polished, mid-40s, eyes bright in a way that felt hungry. Your Honor, my client seeks equitable distribution. Mrs. Carter has concealed assets, liquidated property without consent, and destroyed marital property. Destroyed. The word hit hard. Helen rose slowly. Your Honor, Mrs. Carter has not concealed anything. She has protected separate property acquired through inheritance. Mr. Carter's claims rest on incomplete facts. Richard's mouth twitched, almost a smirk. Parker slid a document forward. The Carter Family Trust. Established in 1999, Mr. Carter is co-trustee. He is entitled to access trust assets, including 40% of Carter Construction's value. Lucas finally looked at me. Mia's lips parted, as if the word trust was a language she'd never learned. Judge Alvarez adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Carter, do you dispute the existence of the trust? My throat was dry. No. Your Honor, Richard exhaled, small and satisfied. Helen stepped forward with a single sheet. Your Honor, we do not dispute the trust. We dispute the assumption that it represents the primary estate. We ask to submit a certified financial statement from Reynolds and Grant. Proceed, the judge said. Helen handed copies across the table. Richard read for 3 seconds before his face changed. Then his color drained. His lips moved silently, rereading the same line as if repetition could make it kinder. Parker flipped pages faster, jaw tightening. Judge Alvarez looked up. Mrs. Carter, is it accurate? Your net worth is approximately $46.8 million. The room went silent with weight. Mia made a small sound. Lucas stared at my hands like he expected them to sparkle. Richard turned to me, voice thin. That's not real. I looked at the judge. Yes, Your Honor, that is accurate, Lucas whispered. Mom, how? I tasted pennies in my mouth, the way I always did before bad news. My palms were damp against my skirt. Somewhere behind me, a woman sniffled, and a man cleared his throat. The whole room waited for me to explain my existence. Helen's voice stayed steady. Your Honor, the trust is a small fraction of Mrs. Bass, Carter's separate assets. Much of her wealth derives from documented inheritance and independent investments. We also request the court consider dissipation of marital funds. Parker lifted his chin. Allegations. Helen opened a folder. The sound was sharp. Statements. Cash advances. Hotel invoices. Travel charges. Over the last 3 years, Mr. Carter spent $129,000 on Ms. Natalie Brooks. Natalie's smile collapsed. She snapped toward Richard. You told me you paid for that. Richard hissed. Not now. Judge Alvarez's eyes hardened. Ms. Brooks, you are not a party. Sit down. Natalie's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. Helen continued. Mr. Carter also represented himself as owner of Carter Construction. He is not. Mrs. Carter has been sole owner for 15 years. Richard stood so fast his chair scraped. That's a lie. Judge Alvarez's voice cut clean. Sit down. Mr. Carter. One more outburst and you will be held in contempt. Richard sat, breathing hard, staring at Lucas and Mia like he expected them to fix reality for him. Lucas swallowed. Dad, is Mom the owner? Richard's eyes flashed. On paper, it's just paperwork. Just paperwork. The phrase burned. Helen stepped closer to the bench. Given the dissipation and the disparity, Mrs. Carter is prepared to offer settlement today. Parker's eyes narrowed. Terms. Helen didn't blink. Mr. Carter may retain his vehicle and personal belongings in storage and receive a one-time payment of $50,000 in exchange for relinquishing all claims to Mrs. Carter's separate assets and to the trust. Additionally, repayment of dissipated funds via wage garnishment. Richard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He leaned toward me, voice shaking. Evelyn, you're doing this to me. I met his eyes for the first time. I saw the man who once promised to build something real. I saw the man who texted me to be gone. I'm not doing anything, I said quietly. I'm stopping. Judge Alvarez tapped her pen once. Mr. Carter, you have 15 minutes to confer with counsel. Consider your options. As everyone rose, Mia reached for my arm, then froze. Lucas hovered, lips moving, searching for words he'd never practiced. Richard stared at the papers like a death certificate. Natalie stared at Richard like she'd married a mirage. And me. I sat very still. Something in my chest loosened, not into joy, but into clarity. My mouth didn't smile, not yet, but my eyes did, cold and sure, because I finally understood they had never loved the woman I actually was. I didn't walk out of the courthouse feeling victorious. There was no rush, no smile stretching across my face, no moment where the sky suddenly looked bluer. What I felt instead was a strange quiet, like the moment after a long machine finally powers down. The noise had stopped. The shaking inside me settled. Outside, the city moved on. Cars honked. Someone laughed into a phone. A man argued with a parking meter. Life didn't pause just because mine had cracked open and reassembled itself into something unrecognizable. Richard didn't look at me as he passed. His shoulders were hunched now, his confidence folded inward like a cheap suit. Natalie trailed behind him, whispering urgently, her words sharp and panicked. Whatever fantasy she'd bought into was peeling away fast. I watched them disappear down the steps, not with satisfaction, but with distance, emotional distance, the kind that doesn't ache anymore. Lucas stood near the door, hands shoved into his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels like a boy waiting to be picked up. Mia hovered a few feet away, eyes darting between me and her phone, torn between instinct and habit. "Mom," Lucas finally said, one word, heavy, unfinished. I looked at him, really looked. The familiar face, the entitlement, the fear he didn't know how to name. "You'll be okay," I said. Not reassurance, not a promise, just a fact that belonged to him now, not me. He nodded, confused by the lack of rescue in my voice. Mia stepped forward, then stopped. Her mouth opened, closed. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About all of it." I believed her, and it didn't change anything. "I know," I replied. They waited for more. An explanation, a lecture, forgiveness wrapped up neatly so they could take it home and feel better. I gave them nothing. I turned and walked away, my heels steady, my back straight. For the first time in decades, I didn't check who was following. That night, I sat alone in my downtown apartment, the one I'd bought quietly months ago. Floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, no family photos yet, just space. The city glowed below me, distant and alive, like a promise I hadn't decided whether to accept. I poured a glass of water, not wine. My hands were steady now. I thought about the trust, the document Helen had flagged at the end of our meeting, the one I'd forgotten because I'd buried it deep under years of survival, the one Richard had tried to use against me. He thought the trust was leverage. He had no idea it was incomplete. There were amendments I'd never finalized, clauses tied to conduct, to fiduciary responsibility, to moral character. Paperwork I delayed because I'd been too busy holding everyone else together. Too busy being reasonable, too busy disappearing. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder Helen had prepared. Drafts, notes, dates, possibilities. The law didn't care about my feelings, but it respected precision, and I was very precise. My phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. "We can still fix this. Just say the word. Richard." I stared at the message, then set the phone face down on the counter. I didn't block him. Not yet. Silence was more useful. They thought the worst had passed. The house, the money, the courtroom. They thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. It was just the moment they realized I wasn't afraid anymore. And when a woman stops being afraid of losing what never truly belonged to her, she becomes something far more dangerous. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like the one who holds everything together while slowly disappearing, I want you to know something. You're not weak for enduring it. You were surviving. And survival takes strength people never see until you stop giving it away. There comes a moment when silence stops protecting you and starts erasing you. When love, unreturned and unrecognized, turns into a quiet kind of violence. And when that moment arrives, choosing yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity. I don't know what the next chapter will look like yet. I only know that I'm no longer living for approval, or gratitude, or permission. I'm living with intention now. If this story touched something in you, stay with me, subscribe. Because if you've ever been taken for granted by the people closest to you, this story isn't over.